So again, my name is Mike Harrington, and I am an assistant director at the Tishman Environment and Design Center here at the New School. We are very glad to welcome you all, everyone that's here with the Plastic Free Waters Partnership.
Just quickly, so there is some kind of exciting news on a federal level. Senator Tom Udall and US Representative Alan Lowenthal has put together some extended producer responsibility legislation. But effectively, it's asking producers of packaging to take responsibility for their packaging at the end of its life, covering the cost of collection and the cost of clearing up any litter associated with their products. And within that bill, there's also a requirement to have a countrywide, a US-wide container deposit program. Here, they're asking for comments on that, or any thoughts on that by November the 21st. So I think as an organisation, we should at least put in a response to that bill, just to show that we're supporting the ethos of it, really.
Hi everyone. So just a quick update on the New York bills is updating our bottle deposit bill. So extending it to non-carbonated beverages, and particularly I think a big one is liquor and wine bottles. So I know we're the Plastic Free Water Partnership, but we're in a bit of a glass crisis where we don't know how to recycle it. So we really need to up the amount of people bringing them back to beverage deposit centers instead of curbside recycling. So we're hoping that a higher fee will do that, and extending the bottle bill to them. And then there's also talk of upping the fee from 5 cents to 10 cents, maybe higher for liquor and wine bottles, but all of it's relatively early going. All of this was in a bottle bill last year. So I think that we're going to push forward with a similar bill, if not the exact same bill. Another state priority is going to be EPR. So similar to Washington, California, ultimately what's going to happen is that producers are going to have to take responsibility. So it would require a certain percentage of recyclable content, and it would fall on the manufacturers to pay for the recycling, which, in the end, the hope would be to push them to use less packaging individually. So we've been working with a couple Senate and Assembly members to draft something. It's very, very difficult. So California, as you just heard, had some issues with it. They are leading the charge right now, and they have a far more equipped recycling infrastructure and also environmental agency staffing. So we are trying to figure out, based on the lessons learned from California and Washington, how we can do this here. But I have a feeling that this will be a multi-year battle. But it's ultimately where we're heading. And then on the state level for single-use plastics, so last year the plastic bag ban passed. It'll go into effect on March 1st. We are still attempting to get answers from the DEC and some guidance as to how that's going to impact municipalities that already have local legislation. We have heard from them that the plastic bag ban itself will include the sort of thicker 10-cent plastic bags. It will exempt the reusable bags that you can use 125 times or more. So it's good. That's what we were pushing for. But there's still a lot of guidance coming down the pipeline. So we've been having calls with DEC every few months, and we're hoping to have a guidance out relatively soon. So we've been talking about doing a slightly more comprehensive bill where instead of spreading out the resources among several bills, we just try to do it all at once. Because I know a lot of the groups that lobby in Albany, some are particularly straw focused, some are particularly polystyrene focused, and we want them all in a coalition lobbying together instead of splitting up the time and resources. And then just quick thing too, on the city level, there's sort of a collective suite of bills. It was actually supposed to be up in Consumer Affairs this month, but it's going to get pushed back likely to next month. So there is a study on all single-use plastics. So the goal would be to determine what the recyclability content is of single-use plastics, what the alternatives are, and then ban any ones where there's an alternative and require them to be recyclable as well. This was initially an Espinal bill that was going to be sort of based on that EU model, but there was some language in there similar. It was actually cribbed from the polystyrene bill that got the city sued. So we are changing the language, and now we're doing a study for a year and then moving forward. So that's sort of the big one. Then there are a couple other ones that are going to be in the same committee. One is a reusable cups bill. So it's ensuring that anybody who brings their cup to a restaurant or coffee shop can actually have it refilled. So that's an issue right now. And the other one is a utensils bill. So I think utensils, we usually think of fork, spoon, knife, but this actually includes cups, plates, pretty much all foodware. And it's if you're dining in and you have the option for dishwashing, you have to use reusables. Anything takeout has to be by request only. And in the committee, there's also a balloon bill right now, but it's more focused on preventing fires than preventing pollution. So it's just labeling and it's just on Mylar balloons. So we're going to have to do some work on that one. But that's what's been going on. And then I also want to plug, right now, there is a Town of Hempstead hearing on banning the intentional release of balloons. So hopefully by the end of the meeting, I find out what happens with that.
Hi everyone, so I'll be quick. The microplastics working group in the past year or so has mainly been a source of information. A lot of you are on our weekly email blast, but that has been a great way to stay involved with not only people in this region, but also national groups and international groups. And as a result of that, over the past year, we've also been working on giving our group a little bit more of a structure. So adopting some working group goals overall. And now we're trying to pivot to understanding a little bit more of what everyone's overall interests are in the group. So as I mentioned, we've expanded from the New York, New Jersey region and have folks, international scientists, policymakers, educators, all of those types of people. And I think it's a great opportunity to basically understand why they're participating in the group and what they can offer to the group, whether it's collaborating on research and citizen science efforts, for example, drafting outreach materials, working on more of the policy side of things. So as a result, a few of us have been working on a draft survey that should be going out hopefully in the next couple of months. We just finished up some of the questions last week. And so that'll be a great way to kind of test the temperature of the people all around the world and see what they're willing to contribute to this group, because it seems like it's a really untapped potential. Hi everyone, I'm here again. I'm really looking forward to this panel again. I'm Katie, Plastics and Human Health. I'm sure a lot of you in your presentations and just your conversations with people over time are also excited because this is a very multidisciplinary panel. Not only do we have a researcher, a professor, a designer, a reporter, an attorney, everyone who's going to be able to offer different and unique perspectives to this issue. First, we're going to start with Barent Roth. So Barent is a sustainable designer, educator, advocate, and founder of Anthropocene Design, a consultancy designing products for the circular economy and circular economy manufacturing, a new business transforming used materials into valuable products. Anthropocene Design was selected as a winner of the NYC Curve to Market Challenge to design products from New York City's waste.
I am a teacher here at the New School. I teach in the Industrial Design Department, and this is a project that we call testingourwaters.net, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, but it's essentially towing a net through the water to collect for citizen scientists to collect for marine plastic pollution. We're familiar with this exponential growth since World War II and the plastics industry. Unfortunately, we're only recovering for closed-loop recycling about 2%, and the vast majority is being either landfilled, 40%, or leaked into our ecosystems, where we're getting nearly a third of the plastics leaked into our ecosystems. I teach a life cycle assessment course here at the New School, and this leakage is not accounted for. So there's a lot of misleading information on the internet when you look into life cycle assessments. Just know that a third of all the plastics, what we know is showing up in our marine ecosystems, is not accounted for in any way using life cycle assessment, because they don't know how much damage it's doing to the ecosystem. They've started working on it, but current life cycle assessment tools do not account for this at all, which is a big problem. In speaking with Marcus Erickson at Five Gyres, he described it like this, that we shouldn't be thinking of this issue as a patch or an island or even a soup, but the work they did shows that it's much more of a plastic smog, and by pulling a large trawl through oceans all over the world, they were able to give us the first estimate of 5.25 trillion pieces of plastic, accumulating up to nearly 270,000 metric tons. So it's helpful for us to think of this as a smog that is dissipating throughout our marine ecosystems. But from a design point of view, I think this is really helpful when I share with my students, is that we need to be looking at this and thinking, if we saw this in our kitchen, if we saw running water in a sink, our first instinct is to go and shut off the tap. But if we think of how this problem is affecting plastic pollution in the ocean, what we've been doing as a society is spending a lot of time mopping the floor, right? But until we shut off the tap, we're going to be continuously trying to clean up our mess. So yes, eventually we need to be mopping up the floor, and eventually we need to be cleaning it up, but I think we need to shift a lot of efforts into shutting the plastic pollution off at its source. So we try and do that in various ways. I'll share some of those. Globally, as I'm sure a lot of you know, we're dumping a garbage truck full of plastic into the ocean every minute. So I've been speaking for a couple minutes here. That's 3 garbage trucks into the ocean. And at this rate, we will have more plastic in our oceans than fish. It's important to remember the role of phytoplankton in this ecosystem. Scientists estimate that these small plant-like creatures are providing 50 to 80% of our oxygen. So at the very least, every second breath is coming from the ocean. And so it's vitally important that we think of this. It's not just an issue that's affecting the albatross and the turtles and the whales, but this is going to have an immediate impact on us if we cannot breathe. Our project, Testing Our Waters.net, has been working with 5 gyres in New York, New Jersey Baykeeper for a while now. It began in collaborating with 5 gyres. I worked with Anna Cummins, the co-founder, along with Marcus, and that relationship had a chance to flourish when they were in Brooklyn. This is them trawling in the Hudson. You can see a scale image of this in the back as well. This is more recently, was able to join them trawling in the East River. And you can see in this little 20-minute excursion between the Manhattan and the Williamsburg Bridge, we accumulated a lot of debris, and in that debris were 3 straws, which doesn't sound like much. When you extrapolate what those 3 straws mean in catching them in a very small trawl, it comes out to 40,000 straws in the East River. So the collaboration with them began with a problem. They were getting requests for trawls all around the world, and it became clear that if we just had some drawings that could assist people in making these trawls on their own, that would be very helpful. So started by doing that, led to a lot of DIY trawls. This is an inexpensive trawl that you could be made from IKEA parts. This was one of the early trawls that used recycled bottles, repurposed bottles as flotation device. That led to what we call the Re-3DP trawl, which we're now able to produce these trawls that anyone can download the instructions, they can download the file, all the parts together amount to $15. And our most recent trawl is on the table here. We call it the Guppy Friend trawl because it's adapted to fit Patagonia's Guppy Friend bag, which is their microplastic laundry bag, where you can put all of your synthetic clothes into the bag, zip it up, do your wash, and then the synthetic fibers are captured in the bag. So we're taking that bag and putting it into trawls. I saw someone from the Hudson River Park, they just asked for us to produce 2 of these that they're using at the estuary. Then to just touch on some of the latest findings and make sure we're all kind of on the same page. As some of you know, last spring, they discovered microplastic in the Pyrenees Mountains with outrageous daily counts of fragments, films, and fibers. So now we not only have the microplastics in our ocean, but it's in our land, in our ice, and in our drinking water. This was from the August World Health Organization report. You can see in this diagram, there are several different ways in which it is entering our freshwater system. And if that causes you to drown your sorrows, remember that it's also in our beer. So I'll end it there. Thank you.
And so we have Dr. Phoebe Stapleton with us today. Dr. Stapleton's research at Rutgers focuses on nanoplastics, which are small plastic particles less than 100 nanometers in a single dimension, either formed by bulk degradation of larger microplastic particles or formed intentionally at the nanoscale. Unfortunately, due to this small nano size, nanoplastic exposures are difficult to quantify. So Phoebe's going to be talking about her laboratory model of maternal fetal nanoplastic exposure and what her team did to identify some of those health consequences.
So my background is actually in microvascular physiology. So by training, I look at the cardiovascular system. And interestingly, that Barent used the term smog, and that's exactly how I got into this area. We started looking at high smog days in urban areas in particular, and they led to increased incidence of cardiovascular disease. And that led us to the question of how the things that you're inhaling, how that affects the cardiovascular system. It's a little counterintuitive. You're inhaling different smog, you're inhaling different gases, you're inhaling different particles, and intuitively you'd think that that would have applications to the pulmonary system. You'd think there'd be increases in asthma, COPD, emphysema cases. But instead we're seeing myocardial infarction, we're seeing angina, and we're seeing overall cardiovascular dysfunction. So how do these two compare? From that point, we looked at the size of the particles. So we looked at the air pollution overall. We needed to determine if it's the gases in the air pollution or if it's actually the particles in the air pollution. And then the sizes of those particles in the air pollution. There's PM10, which are the largest, the coarse fraction. Then there's PM2.5, which are the ones that you'll hear about on the news. We have an orange day or a red day, and there are concerns. Those are PM2.5. And that means that the average size is smaller than 2.5 microns in a single dimension. Of that fine particle size, there's an ultrafine fraction as well. And this ultrafine fraction is less than 100 nanometers in a single dimension. Now I say that and it sounds interesting, it sounds very sciencey, but I'd like you to take a minute just to think about what that size means. So if we consider the average human hair, and if you look on your shoulder somewhere, you probably dropped one here. So the average human hair is 100 microns in a single dimension. And I'm speaking of something that's less than 100 nanometers in a single dimension. So what we're talking about is something exponentially, and by exponentially I mean 10 to the 14th size particle. Okay, so this is the ultrafine fraction. Now this ultrafine fraction is especially important. It's become identified as being even more toxic than the fine sized particles, and that's because it can get deeper into the lung space. When it gets deeper into the lung space, it avoids the normal clearance. Therefore, there's no mucosal escalator. You can't cough these particles up. They get deep into the alveolar space, and that allows for more biological interactions. When we start to look at these biological interactions, we can naturally see how they're going to affect the cardiovascular system. These particles can cross from the pulmonary system into the rest of the body. And so our work started to look at that, engineered nanomaterials in particular. These are also particles that are less than 100 nanometers in a single dimension, and they're intentionally produced at that size. We started to look at those because we could eliminate all of the gaseous component of air pollution. We could eliminate all of the Fenton chemistry. We knew exactly what our particle chemistry was. We knew exactly how many were going in, and therefore we could measure the biological outcomes of that. A lot of our work has been done in metallics, and only recently have we started going into plastic particles as well. And so we started using nanoplastic particles, and specifically nanopolystyrene particles, in all honesty, because I could order these from a company with a fluorescent tag associated with that. And what that meant was that I could put them into our animal models, because surprisingly I can't get human subjects to volunteer for these exposures, so we use our animal models. We looked at our animal models and we were able to put in a known amount of particles, and then we were able to track those particles using that fluorescent tag. And just by luck, they happen to be plastic particles. Now, Barent did a really good job of explaining the microplastics and explaining the size, or explaining what we were collecting out of our waterways and what we were collecting out of our oceans and things like that. And those are all particles that you could see on the screen. But we're talking about particles that are within the microplastic size. Microplastics you can barely see. Nanoplastics are exponentially smaller than those particles that you've seen. So I did the math at one point to figure out if we're talking about microplastics, and the microplastic is 1 square millimeter in dimension. Millimeter is that really small one when you look at the ruler, that tiniest line that you think might not even be a measurement, sorry. So if we take that particle and we extrapolate that out to be just nanoparticles, we get something in the range of 1 times 10 to the 18th particles. It's the number of particles that are going in. And I mention that only because that number, mass relationship, has to do with surface area, which means there's more particle surface to interact with our biological systems, which means more cells can be in contact with the surface of that particle. Now that's important as we come back around to this idea of plastics, because plastics are very unique. Not only do they have different chemistry associated with them, one side can be positive, one side can be negative, but they're also made of different industrial chemicals. And in a biological system, we as scientists don't necessarily know yet how those chemicals are interacting with the biological system. Not only that, depending on the waterways or the indoor environment that we see, those particles can absorb different chemicals to the surface of them as well. Again, we don't know how the biological system is interacting with those particles. What I do know, it's very little, but what I do know in this area is that I work in the maternal fetal model. And I don't say that as a scare tactic, I say that because that's what I do. So I'm interested in how the particles that are inhaled by a pregnant woman not only affect her physiology, specifically cardiovascular, but how it also affects the unborn child in the fetal development, and how it affects that child if they are to survive, how it affects that child in their livelihood, how it affects essentially the next generation based on this exposure. So what I do know is when I put our plastic particles into our maternal fetal model, we do get particle translocation. We put these particles into the lung, and I have fluorescent evidence to show that indeed we were able to put them in the lung. I wait 24 hours later, and I use some very fancy techniques to be able to find those fluorescent particles later. And where I find them is in the maternal heart. I find them still in the maternal lung, but I also find them in a variety of different systemic organs. These organs include the placenta, the umbilical cord, the fetal liver, the fetal heart, and the fetal brain. And I mention the fetal brain in particular because we're all aware of the blood-brain barrier in an adult system. And you think, oh, it's okay because it's not going to cross the blood-brain barrier. My concern in particular is not only do we find them in the fetal heart and therefore they could deposit there, but also we find them in the fetal brain. And if they are to deposit there, we could indeed end up in a case where the fetal blood-brain barrier is formed after the fact that this particle has been deposited there. And so I'm not mentioning these to be scare tactics, I'm mentioning these to be what ifs and to find out what the next stage of science is. Lastly, we looked at the particles being produced since 1964, I think. After World War I, we started to see them more and more in the environment. And the idea of particles being inhaled is not something new. This is not something that, because we have plastics, we're inhaling particles. Because of the Industrial Revolution, we're inhaling particles. This has been the case since man started fire. We've been cooking indoors and we've been exposed to particles. So this idea overall is still something that scientists are struggling with, what those particles are, where those particles are going, and how they're affecting the biological systems. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Lisa Kaas Boyle is an environmental attorney with an expertise in policy solutions to plastic pollution. So we're going to kind of switch from the science side to the policy side for a little bit. She's a recognized expert in legal policy to stop plastic pollution and has produced panels and spoken before audiences around the globe, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the United Nations. Lisa is a featured expert in the award-winning documentary Plastic Paradise, The Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and is executive producer of Overload, America's Toxic Love Story, about the human health impacts of petrochemicals.
I'm an environmental attorney and I'm focused on policy to prevent plastic pollution. I've been working on this for my entire career, beginning with bags, moving into urinals, controlling urinals, then to microplastics. I am also a co-founder of Plastic Pollution Coalition. And we were very intentional in creating our name as Plastic Pollution Coalition to fight against the term of art used by the industry. My first connection, learning about the relationship between oil and plastic, was when I was in law school. My first client as a student attorney was Greenpeace, one of the first international organizations to realize and focus on the problem of plastic pollution. So working with Greenpeace, I really learned about the power of the oil industry in pushing petrochemicals and plastics. And should the lessons not be graphic enough, Baton Rouge by an Exxon refinery. So if you fail to get who's in power, all you have to do is look up at these looming towers of the Exxon refinery. You can't get elected if you don't have money from the fossil fuel industry in Louisiana. And sadly, that has become a prominent influence in our national politics too. If you look at the administration currently, the Trump administration, in the cabinet we have, the fossil fuel industry is seeing the writing on the wall and realizing that they need to be putting more effort into plastics as a money-making part of their industry instead of fuel. So right now, reports say that there are more than 333 petrochemical plants underway or nearly completed, mostly in the Gulf region of our country, where we also get our seafood. And that's $65 billion investment, just as Asia and the Middle East are also amping up their production. There is no way we're going to be able to deal with it through recycling or cleanup. And most of the world deals with their plastic through burning it, creating dioxins, which is a horrible health risk, a cancer causing. But the problem will only get worse with this explosion because of fracking and now creating these fracking facilities to make more plastic. Most of that plastic is going to be packaging. I think it's actually a farce that products that are described as organic can be packaged in plastic that creates a toxic leaching into those products. So we're really at a crisis, and the plastics and the oil industry are really trying to focus us on cleanup and recycling, but this doesn't deal with the human health impacts at all. Once the plastic is created, that's already down the line. The fracking is causing horrible water pollution. The creation of the plastics is causing horrible air pollution. In the region where it's produced, you have the cancer corridor, so people are getting sick and dying because of the manufacturing of it. And when it's used, we are being poisoned through our food drink and through eating seafood that has plastic pollution in it. So the waste is only the tail end of the problem, of the health problem of plastic pollution. And it's really hard for us to avoid plastic in our air, water, and soil. And we need to be creating better policy to prevent plastic from contaminating our food and drink. We also need to switch to the precautionary principle so that we're not debating about the science forever. We're taking proactive steps to protect human health. We need to look at green chemistry. We need to elect people who understand the link between climate change, air pollution, and plastics, so that we're attacking the problem in a holistic way. And finally, I think the most important thing we can do is focus on campaign finance reform. So we have better laws to prevent the hijacking of our democracy by the fossil fuel industry. If you see one film besides Overload, please see Dark Money. It's about my dear friend, the governor of Montana, Steve Boyle, who has battled Citizens United quite effectively in his state of Montana to keep that dark money out so that he can make progressive environmental legislation. And we need to do that nationally. We need to elect better leaders, and we need to keep the fossil fuel industry out so that we can protect ourselves from this explosion. Thank you.
we're going to have Scott Fallon talking to us today too. So Scott is an investigative reporter who has covered the environment at the Bergen Rutgers since 2008, concentrating on the legacy of industrial pollution in New Jersey. His investigative work has been recognized by the Society of Environmental Journalists, the Deadline Club, the Society of Silurians, if I said that correctly, and the New Jersey Press Association. Fallon previously worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer as a suburban correspondent and has written for the Newsday and New York Daily News.
So I've been covering environmental issues for a number of years before I first heard the term microplastics, and that came in 2016 when New Jersey Baykeeper, along with Rutgers, published what I consider a groundbreaking report on microplastics in the New York, New Jersey harbor estuary. Barent made reference to that. It showed that there were, extrapolated from the data that they collected, that there were 166 million pieces of microplastics in New York and New Jersey's waterways. To me, this was something that was eye-opening, and I delved into the subject as much as I possibly could. But one thing that is the next step to this, well, we know it's there. We know it's there in abundance. We know it never goes away. And we know that there are pathways to the human body through seafood, through drinking water, through the air we breathe. The next step is, how is that affecting us? That is something that the public wants to know about. It's the big question now for the subject. Rutgers published Dr. Beth Rabbit at Rutgers published a report that showed that there were, in microplastics that they collected from the Passaic River, they found that there were 300 different compounds attached to some of these microplastics, from flavoring agents to pharmaceuticals attached. What are we bringing into our bodies? It's not just the plastic, it's what's coming along with the plastic. Here's my statement. I am not a scientist, but yes, I do depend on you. I do depend on your research. A lot of what I do is based on evidence that you have, that you're collecting, that you're in the field and in your laboratories are producing. First thing, if you're an academic, if you are a scientist, make friends in your communications department. These people are essential to getting your message across. I deal with Rutgers a lot. Rutgers is one of the best science communication departments that I know of. Judith Weiss is here. Judith Weiss has done groundbreaking work for decades in the Meadowlands. A lot of what she has done was conveyed to me and others by the communications department. Couple things. When you are dealing with the public, avoid jargon, initials, acronyms. Yesterday, I was looking at a 500-page EPA report. They had 75 initials, acronyms, abbreviations, a little bit of an index before the start of the report, because all of these were going to be used throughout the entire report. It is just mind-numbing. Simplify, but don't dumb down. Know your audience. How you got to your conclusion is very important. Great interest to your peers. It's interesting to me, but to the public, it's less interesting than the conclusion itself. Again, don't use language that is so specific to your field that no one outside knows what they're talking about, or specific to your institution. Some academic institutions have their own jargon. Tell us what your research shows and what the impacts are. With microplastics, yes, what's happening in nature is important, but as I said, what is happening to the human body, to human health, that is where the narrative is going. That is where the story is. Tell us where things were before this research and how this furthers science. Give it in context. Tell us the next step. Where is this going? Where is the science going to? And here's the key thing, and rarely is this done. Tell us what you don't know. Tell us what your research doesn't achieve. Maybe you set off trying to look for A, but you found B. Tell us about A. Tell us why you weren't able to get to A and how you were able to get to B. Tell us what the bridge is, what you'd like to achieve, but maybe other researchers somewhere else can take that B and come to A. It's possible. It happens all the time. Business, I don't know if there's too many people within the business community here, but I just want to tell you that the bar is very high. My inbox, well, it's actually my clutter box, is filled to the brim with pitches from public relations entities and businesses about a new product that will do X, Y, and Z and revolutionize everything. I really do not care much about that. Most journalists don't, and trade journalists do, probably much more so. But if you are a business, pitch your company or your product or your service as a way that amplifies my coverage of the subject matter. Government, I don't know if there's anybody from government here. The New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, the EPA Region 2, which covers New York, New Jersey, and the Caribbean. You're doing science, promote it better. There are certain federal agencies that do it so much better than you guys. NOAA, NASA, amazing how they promote that. Budgets are budgets, I understand that. Some are much more than others, but you're doing science, let's see what it is. Advocates, I deal with advocates all the time. I mentioned New Jersey, New York, New Jersey, Bay Harbor, Clean Ocean Action. Clean Ocean Action does a beach sweep of New Jersey, Cape May in the south to Sandy Hook in the north, 120 miles. They collect the garbage twice a year in a major beach sweep. That is hard data. They've been doing this for 30 years. That is evidence. That is, you can see trends from that. That is something I use all the time. I depend on advocates. Some advocates, I don't mean to be critical, but sometimes hyperbole is a big thing with you guys. Oftentimes you do not have to exaggerate. You do not have to fill your press releases with a lot of adjectives. The data is the data. The conclusions, based on that data, if they're tight, man, that's all you need to show me. Legal bias, this is something I deal with all the time. I often say the press has a conflict bias. Conflict is news. We're drawn to it like bugs to an outdoor light, and I won't go to the other thing. As I said, evidence. Again, we like a scientist, good reporters build their stories based on evidence. We love to see evidence. We love to see data. We love to see how you come to your conclusion, because if it's sound, if it's reasonable, if it looks good, more often than not, we're going to write about it. This is a little bit offhand. Now, the depressing part, there's a lot less of us than there used to be 10 years ago, 20 years ago. The news industry, as probably everyone knows, is in tumult these days. The amount of newsroom jobs has plummeted about 25% in just the last 10 years. When I started as an environment reporter in 2008, there were probably a dozen of us all in New Jersey as a whole. I think there may be 3 of us right now covering the environment full time. There's not a lot of us there. So you know what that means? We don't have a lot of time to devote to everything that's out there. We have to cherry pick a lot of times what we write about and what's most important to our readers and to our audience. And that's something that we deal with on a constant basis. So those are just a few communication tips I want to impart to you, but I'll be around for questions. Thanks very much.
I've heard a lot about endocrine disruptors caused by plastics. Is there anything that could be done? Are they studying how to reverse the damage that has been done over the years?
So Lisa mentioned that when she was speaking as well. And so the interesting thing about the endocrine disruption component is that it's really in the industrial chemicals that are being used to create the type of plastic you want to create. And so I think, as Scott mentioned, not all plastics are created equal, and so not all chemicals are the same that are going into them. So as a toxicologist, it makes my job really, really hard, especially as you start looking at the policymakers, because I happen to look at
nano-sized polystyrene. And so the polypropanol group goes, oh, well, see, we're fine. It's not me. And so it's really difficult because it changes on a minute-to-minute basis. And so you just have to be very positive as to what it is that you're looking at. So the BPA, for example, is a chemical that's used in certain plastics, especially that have been used in food products. And Lisa's absolutely correct in that we are BPA free, which is fantastic. However, BPS has the same outcome in the end result, and BPF has the same outcome as that as well. And so it took us decades to be able to identify that BPA has these endocrine disruption effects. It's going to take us decades to now identify BPS is an issue, BPF is an issue, and whatever the chemical company can switch between now and then, we'll have to start at the beginning again and identify that that is also an issue. So it makes it to be really difficult. But to answer your question, the endocrine disruptor is a chemical that looks very similar to an estrogen, for example. It has the same chemical construct. And therefore, as you remember in high school, there's the lock-key model of receptors. And so that key looks identical to the lock that your body already has. And so it can turn these receptors on and off without being something that your body has produced. It's something that your body has taken in instead.
Want to absorb this information, want to know more about it. How do we get information out to a wider, community and population to try and educate on some of these issues?
Know what the publication's audience is. Know that if they cover a certain geographic region, I cover New Jersey, so I'm going to be focused on everything and anything in New Jersey. If something's happening in California, that's cool, that's great. 99% of the time I'm not going to write about it unless there's a New Jersey angle to it, because that's what my audience is. And I think that's key to going forward with research, pitching news organizations, knowing what that news organization's audience is.
Something that I've kind of been struggling with, finding the balance between keeping the story simple to bring more people into it and bring people's interest in, to kind of build the movement behind it, but then also making sure you're covering all of the big picture stuff that's necessary for actually creating the right solutions for the problem. So how do you kind of work around those two things that are somewhat conflict?
Well, it's like writing a news story itself. I start off usually at the top of the story, the lead of the story, being very general, very basic. And as you go into the story itself, that's where you come out with the details, with what is behind everything, with the evidence, the hard evidence that's there. The conclusion is at the top. And it's like an academic research paper. You have your abstract. Man, your abstract is important because that's what normal people read. That's what journalists read. We want to read that and we want to understand what's there. And that'll make us turn the page or pay $50 or whatever it is to buy the academic paper. But I'm not joking around. Start off, man, they call it the elevator pitch. What is your research about? What does your research show? Tell it to me if I'm in an elevator and I'm about to get off. And then go from there. But make sure you have the 50, 100, 150, 500 pages behind it that you could say, oh, really? Well, prove it to me. Here. That's kind of my answer to that.
Yeah, I had a question for Phoebe, going back to the fetal brain issue. If you can talk about what you have found and if there are others working on this issue, and maybe just clarify it again a second time.
Sure. So there.
Can you just go a bit closer to the microphone?
Sure. So there are others working in the area, especially in engineered nanomaterials, whether those be metals or plastics overall. So anything in that small, ultrafine, nano size range. And really it's a case of everywhere we look, we find them. And so it's not necessarily that we were looking in that area, we're able to know that they translocate out of the lungs, and that happens in other models as well. And with the fibers, they're able to translocate. So we've seen multi-wall carbon nanotubes are very similar to a nanofiber plastic size range as well. And so it's a case of where do they go after they leave the lung? And these particles are small enough to get into the space, but they're too big to get taken out through the kidney. And so the question is, where do they go in the body, and what do they do when they're there? And so that's the question we're at to now, is we've been able to identify that they move, and we've been able to identify that they stop, but we don't know what they do when they stop, and we don't know how long they're there.
How long has this been studied?
Well, the first engineered nanomaterial, to go back to Scott and his 500 pages of information, the first engineered nanomaterial was produced in 1991. And so, and around that same time, we were looking at ultrafine air fraction and that idea and epidemiological evidence of high smog days and cardiovascular outcomes. So it's all been recent in comparison to many scientific studies.
I think we have to pay more attention to cigarette butts, because cigarette butts are a huge thing and
important for the community to know. So we had these workshops, we've had them for 4 years, and we brought the community out.
It's an interesting problem, because I had her in Flushing Bay, they didn't,